Good afternoon in Maastricht. My name is Tom van Veen. I'm acting pro-rector of this university. And hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Tim Reissner will defend the academic thesis Learning to Speak Up, a Socialization Perspective on Newcomer Voice Behavior. May I invite you, Tim, to present you a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis in 15 minutes.
Dear Pro-Rector, dear members of the degree committee, dear colleagues, dear family, and dear friends. It's great to see so many of you here today to finally figure out what I've been up to over the past couple of years. To kick things off, I want you to meet Private, a small and timid penguin with big dreams. He finds himself venturing into a new world, an organization of highly skilled penguins, led by the seasoned adventurer Skipper, along with his trusted companions, Rico and Kowalski. Together, they've made it their mission to ensure the safety of Madagascar and the well-being of their fellow animals. As a newcomer, Private brings with him a unique perspective and fresh ideas that differ from the established practice of an organization. However, stepping into this environment is no easy feat. Private is faced with daunting challenges as he navigates his new role and strives to make meaningful contributions. For instance, during their first mission to retrieve a valuable artifact, Private notices a potential flaw with the team's plan that could lead to complications. Instead of listening to Private's input, Skipper and the other senior team members quickly brush off his concerns, insisting that their plan is foolproof and that Private should focus on following orders rather than questioning their decisions. However, the flaw that Private had identified ultimately leads to unexpected obstacles during the mission, and the team is trapped by the evil academic, Dr. Octavius Bryan, aka Dave the Octopus. Like our team of penguins, organizations often fail to harness the potential contributions of their newcomers. And while the fate of the world may not always depend on it, as it does in the example of my chosen protagonist, an organization that consistently fails to integrate the ideas and the concerns of its newcomers may. And so, I invite you to join Private on his journey as he learns to speak up successfully through organizational socialization. To guide Private's quest, I developed 3 research questions that relate to different aspects of his journey. First, I want to help Private understand when managers like Skipper endorse newcomer voice. Based on prior research, we know that ideas or concerns raised by newcomers such as Private face greater resistance, and at the same time that managers' support and approval is crucial to their successful implementation. Second, I want to help Private understand how newcomer voice and silence develop across the onboarding period. Unfortunately, we still know very little about whether and when voice and silence change over time, and we do not understand the factors that contribute to such changes very well either. Third, I want to help Private understand how an organization's socialization tactics and its climate interact to influence his voice behavior. But before we can delve deeper into these specific research questions, it's essential to establish a clear understanding of socialization and its significance to Private's journey. Put simply, socialization refers to a process, and it's the process through which individuals acquire knowledge, skills, behaviors, and everything else that they need in order to become effective members of an organization. In my research, I furthermore distinguish between socialization tactics, those are the strategies an organization uses to enable newcomer learning, and socialization content, that is, how much newcomers actually learn. Now that that's clear, let's return to my first research question to understand how socialization content is relevant to the question of when managers endorse newcomer voice. First, I suggest that it matters whether newcomers intend to raise ideas, which we refer to as promotive voice in the literature, or whether they intend to highlight problems or concerns, which we call prohibitive voice. In my introductory example, Private identified a potential plan with the team's potential problem with the team's plan that could lead to complications. When employees highlight such shortcomings that could lead to harm if left unaddressed, leaders need to question their own plan of action, reflect on it, and develop a new understanding of the situation. But how often do leaders engage in such introspective processes? I suggest that such activities do not come naturally to most leaders, and hence I expected leaders to endorse newcomers' ideas more readily than their concerns. Secondly, I suggest that how well a newcomer like Private understands an organization influences the extent to which leaders will support the ideas and the problems he raises. Newcomers who are well socialized understand how to frame ideas and concerns in ways that appear legitimate and meaningful to supervisors. My results partially supported these hypotheses. In a sample of 108 matched pairs of organizational newcomers and their supervisors, I found a positive relationship between promotive voice and endorsement, and I found no such relationship for prohibitive voice. However, I also found that socialization moderated the latter relationship. In other words, newcomers who had a better understanding of an organization's politics, language, goals, and other characteristics were more likely to find support for the concerns they raised. Thus, a key takeaway for our team of penguins should be to invest into Private socialization to help him improve his ability to communicate his concerns. And at the same time, to train leaders like Skipper to pay more attention to the concerns that newcomers like Private raise. But does socialization also encourage Private to raise more of his ideas and concerns in the first place? To this end, in study 2, I investigated how newcomer voice and silence develop across the onboarding period. To develop such a dynamic theory of newcomer voice and silence, I start with the observation that newcomers pursue multiple and potentially conflicting goals. For instance, Private expresses his desire to become a meaningful and valued member of the team, to attain scarce resources, and to master job-related skills. Private monitors the progress he makes towards achieving these different goals and engages in behaviors to reduce the discrepancy between his present and his desired state. However, when confronted with multiple and potentially competing goals, Private needs to prioritize which goals to pursue and how to pursue them. For instance, Private can share suggestions or ideas to achieve some of his goals, such as attracting Skipper's attention, meet performance expectations, or to try to appear creative. Or he can share problems and concerns, which may help him to prevent issues from escalating. However, as Private's first attempt at bringing up a potential problem illustrated, sharing problems and concerns can be quite risky. Finally, Private can also decide to stay silent and consciously withhold his ideas or concerns. This behavior might help him to fit in, or figure out when to best speak up, or how to speak up before actually doing so. Thus, in sum, all three behaviors can potentially help Private to meet his different goals. Importantly, this subjective attractiveness and achievability that Private attaches to different goals and behaviors can change through socialization. For instance, observing the behaviors of his more experienced colleagues, Rico and Kowalski, can make some goals seem more attainable or some behaviors seem more desirable than others. Using these insights, I developed hypotheses on how the two forms of voice and silence will develop. Then, I tested them on a sample of 198 organizational newcomers using random coefficient growth models and equivalence testing. In my results, I found support for the prediction that over time newcomers would speak up more with problems and concerns, and that promotive voice would remain stable over time. However, and contrary to what I expected, newcomers' silence did not decrease over time. Next, I found that newcomers who felt more integrated into the organization were more likely to speak up with ideas and concerns, and less likely to stay silent compared to those who felt less integrated. I also found that individual newcomers, like private, are more likely to speak up with ideas and less likely to stay silent when they report higher socialization than when they report lower socialization. And finally, I found that newcomers' growth in prohibitive voice was weaker when their socialization was high compared to when it was low. This suggests that when newcomers feel more connected to an organization, they may actually report fewer problems and concerns. Thus, the findings of Study 2 suggest that newcomer voice and silence develop along different trajectories, and that newcomers who report higher socialization speak up more and stay silent less. However, my results also suggest that socialization can dampen the willingness of newcomers to flag problems and concerns. Building on these insights, Study 3 aims to find out how an organization's tactics and climate can either facilitate or hinder voice behavior. First, let's once again consider our penguin newcomer private. Throughout his journey, the other penguins employ various tactics to structure his learning. These range on a continuum from institutionalized to individualized. Rather than separating him from established employees and grouping him together with other newcomers for a set of shared learning experiences, private's learning is done on the job. He doesn't acquire knowledge according to a precise schedule and clearly defined learning path either. Instead, his learning does not seem to follow an observable logic or sequence. And finally, rather than providing him with support, private receives little mentorship and social support from organizational insiders until he conforms to their expectations. As you can see, the individualized process that private is exposed to is ambiguous and difficult, which can be overwhelming and confusing to newcomers. However, research also suggests that it can lead to greater creativity and willingness to challenge the status quo. In contrast, it's easy to see why institutionalized tactics can get newcomers up to speed quickly, but pose a potential danger to their willingness to speak up. After all, if all of an organization's newcomers are socialized the same way, how can they be encouraged to produce different ideas or concerns? Here, I argue that contextual factors, such as an organization's innovation climate, play a significant role in determining the kind of information private receives and the experiences he encounters. If an organization possesses a strong innovation climate, it can use institutionalized tactics to train newcomers in innovation skills like communication and critical thinking, and encourage them to take risks and share their ideas. In such a climate, newcomers also learn that they have access to resources like equipment to support their innovative ideas. Hence, I predicted that institutionalized tactics, implemented in the context of an innovation climate, would foster a sense of confidence and competence in newcomers that can actually facilitate their expression of ideas and concerns. Again, the results partially supported these hypotheses. My data, collected from 83 matched peers of newcomers and their supervisors, suggests that innovation climate moderates the relationship between institutionalized socialization and newcomer promotive voice, an effect that was mediated by newcomer self-efficacy. Importantly, though, I did not find this effect for prohibitive voice. Thus, adding to my findings the key takeaway from Study 3, I found that combining institutionalized tactics with an innovation climate can help our penguins to encourage newcomers like private to express their ideas and overcome the challenges of being new. But just as private has to deal with challenges of joining a new organization, my research has encountered challenges in trying to help private on his journey. For instance, while I've introduced new theories to study newcomer voice, I was unable to zoom in on some of the nuanced mechanisms they imply. For instance, I did not directly capture newcomers' motives for speaking up or supervisors' motives for rejecting newcomer concerns. Here, additional research, both quantitative and qualitative, could help us shed further light on how newcomers adapt and express themselves over time. In addition, my studies employed robust design elements such as dyadic and longitudinal data collection. Still, and despite my efforts to rule out alternative explanations, unmeasured or uncontrolled variables may have influenced my results. To address these issues, future research could collect additional data to carefully control for such confounders, or conduct sensitivity analyses to assess the robustness of my findings. Nevertheless, I hope that you and our 4 penguins have learned quite a lot about how to socialize newcomers and encourage them to speak up with ideas and concerns. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention and give the word back to the Prorector.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. We have 5 members of the opposition, 4 members are present, 1 member is online, and one of your supervisors, Professor de Jong, is also attending this ceremony online. Please switch on your mics if you have the question, if you get the floor to ask the questions. And the opposition will be opened by Professor Zijlstra, Professor of Work and Organization Psychology, University of Maastricht, and Chair of the Assessment Committee.
Thank you, dear candidate. Thank you for this interesting presentation. Very helpful in learning penguins. Also very relevant at the moment since, well, even Antarctica is not even free of, well, all kind of sicknesses amongst penguins even. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, it's nice that we see them here. I also want to give my compliments for this thesis to you and the supervisory team. You have addressed an interesting and relevant topic, voice behavior. And, well, the relevance even goes beyond what you have studied here, but we see that lots of things go wrong in organizations nowadays because people don't want to speak up for all kinds of reasons. So, learning to speak up is the title of your thesis, is important. And also examining the factors that influence this process. So, but my role today is not only to give compliments, I also want to challenge you and discuss the topics. The title of your thesis is Learning to Speak Up, suggesting that an individual needs to learn to speak up. Yet, you focus on organizational factors, say socialization strategy, socialization process. And I wonder whether psychological factors would not be, should not be included. And you have not spent any time or whatever on psychological factors. What kind of psychological factors would I be thinking of?
When you refer to psychological factors, do you refer to personality differences or?
Yeah, partly.
Yeah, so indeed, obviously there are certain dispositions that are already well established in the voice literature, for instance, that we know predict voice and yeah.
Yeah, like, agreeables, extroversion.
Proactive personalities, it comes to mind, sure.
Yeah. But personal or psychological factors related to, for instance, the organization or the people in charge in the organization.
Sure.
I mean, for instance, leadership behavior.
Absolutely, yes. So socialization as a construct obviously encompasses a variety of elements. It's a very holistic, I think, view on the topic because it includes, organizational factors. It includes how do other organizational members treat you. How does your leader also treat you? But leadership definitely plays an important role, and it is subsumed somewhat under this umbrella term, organizational socialization. Certainly, we see now also in the socialization literature that more and more research is trying to focus on disentangling these distinct influences that leaders, that co-workers, and so forth have. And I agree, they play a role.
Yeah, because what they do, I mean, what their responsibility largely is, creating a psychological safe environment in the organization.
Yeah.
Climate, whatever you may call it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yet, however, this is not something that you have addressed or mentioned. You choose to focus on innovative climate.
Sure.
Why is that?
Well, innovation climate really, I think, in the contextualization of what we're doing, I think provides newcomers with both support for innovation and, in terms of what managerial support, but also provides organizational newcomers with an insight that, hey, resources are available and readily available to you to innovate. Certainly, now seeing also my results, where I do not find, for instance, this hypothesized moderation effect for prohibitive voice, where we talk about problems of concerns, I started wondering about factors like psychological safety, and perhaps that would be a moderating variable in that relationship. Certainly, that's something to take into consideration for future research. I have to say, I really thought when I look back on the results for that study in particular, I thought really that it's not just about psychological safety, but it's also about a safety climate that needs to be present in an organization. And that's certainly one of the factors that that I would like to incorporate in future research and take a look at, because the safety climate really is about emphasizing that problems and concerns are a part of everyday organizational life, and hence how we deal with them makes a tremendous difference in whether newcomers and employees more broadly also are willing to speak up with them.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. So I would have expected that this would something be addressed in the discussion, where you offer alternative explanation for the findings or sometimes lack of findings. Yeah,
no, certainly it's something that I looked at. I think I briefly touched upon that in the discussion section of chapter 4 as well. Maybe I could have been a little bit more elaborate, but I do touch upon it, and I do think that it's a likely candidate. To be completely forthright with you, we also had another moderator. I had another moderator in mind when constructing this research and thinking also about why my results didn't lead to the same conclusion for prohibitive voice. And I, at the time, thought about professional identification as another potential factor, in the sense that if you have a strong, let's say, sense of responsibility towards your profession, then organizational misconduct that deviates from what you've been socialized into in terms of your profession might be another motivator for you to speak up and also to address problems and concerns.
Yeah. One last point, and
sure.
Then I'll stop. The title of your thesis is Learning to Speak Up, which suggests an individual developmental process. Yet that is not the approach that you have chosen. So rather than focusing on a between-person success or effect, you could have looked at an within-person
Absolutely.
effect. So that would indeed signify whether there has been a developmental process and whether the person has learned something.
Well, chapter 3 is looking at within-person developments of voice. So I think at least in that study there are some elements. Study 2, that is, so chapter 3. There we look at within-person processes and how voice behavior changes over time as a consequence of socialization. But agreed, taking a learning perspective opens up this immediate thought, let's go within person.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Tangirala. Professor Tangirala is Dean's Professor of Management at the University of Maryland, and Professor Tangirala was member of the assessment committee of this thesis.
Tim, I love the dissertation. I think there's been very little work on newcomers and voice, and I'm glad that you took that challenge on and worked on it. I love the penguins also in your presentation. And your...
I took a bit of creative liberty, if I may say. I hope that's appreciated.
I'm sure that, as your cover indicates, there were a lot of dead ideas before you came up with the right one. Now, I have a few questions. I'll take a couple of them right now, and then if the time permitting, I will come to the rest. The first one has to do with your chapter 3, which is the trajectory, the essay 2. Now, so in the citizenship literature and more broadly in the socialization literature, people have often talked about this idea of honeymoon hangover, right? The idea is that when we enter organizations, we are so thrilled initially about entering that place, right? It's a new place. We look at it with lot of excitement and rose-colored glasses, and over time disenchantment comes in, right? So it's only later that you start seeing problems, because initially you want to believe that the organization you joined is a good one. Mm-hmm. Now, if I look at that, and it's called the honeymoon hangover effect, and people have studied it in different ways, including in citizenship. When I look at, if I apply that to voice trajectories, it provides a very cognitive view of why voice might or might not occur. In the sense that it says that I do not notice problems early on, and mm-hmm. therefore I do not speak up early on, and over time, I actually start noticing problems, and therefore I start speaking up. So it's not that I want to speak up in one way or the other. It is not about changing goals. It's that I don't notice during my honeymoon period a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. I notice them in my hangover period, right? So if I apply it here, then I would see a situation where something like, prohibitive voice would reduce initially and then increase over uh-huh. time, right? Which is consistent with the pattern you found. So what made you look at it with the perspective that you did, which is more to do with goals rather than with a cognitive perspective where you notice problems only after a point in time, because mm-hmm. you cannot speak up without really noticing problems. So how do you think that kind of a perspective might fit into your...
Yeah, I wonder, I've read a little bit about the honeymoon hangover effect, obviously, but here I really wonder, do newcomers not notice, or do they choose to ignore? And my first reading of the literature would be, I think a lot of maybe cognitive dissonance, to pick up on your cognitive perspective, that you experience early on is perhaps brushed away, or again, you spoke of romanticized, is ignored, and only after a period of time you start to realize, okay, I cannot simply ignore this. Another thing, and I'm thinking here really more in terms of a practical example, this case of Wells Fargo, I'm sure you're aware of. There's this great documentary there, and there newcomers were actually socialized in this really great institutionalized program. They were taught right from wrong. They were taught how to do things on their job. And then they entered the real organization, so to speak, and they entered the real job, and all of a sudden they realize, well, what I've been taught in training is exactly opposite from what we actually do as an organization on the ground floor. So in that way, the problems you start to only notice later, and that would be in line with your perspective, I think.
Yeah, and it's not, it's just, I think if you are able to measure the mediators, you probably can visualize whether it's actually this cognitions versus other mechanisms that are operating and explaining, right? Even for socialization, people talk about normalization of deviance. Mm-hmm. Over time, we become, the more socialized you become, you normalize any errors that are happening, saying they're part of the deal, and therefore, less socialized people might be willing to, as they notice more problems over time, will be willing to speak up, which is consistent with your results, mm-hmm. especially when you think about prohibitive voice. I think it highlights a lack of mechanisms that you might want to think about going forward. Mm-hmm. What is happening in the minds of these newcomers? Right? Yeah. I think that's a broader point I wanted to highlight. Another point that I wanted to talk about was with respect to your essay 1, where you take a sense-making perspective mm-hmm. on voice endorsement. It's more, a broader question rather than criticism of what you're studying. People have often talked about threat being a primary reason why supervisors don't endorse voice. I feel threatened by someone standing in front of me who is saying there are problems here, or I have a better idea than you have. I was wondering where, you've not directly compared newcomers with old-timers, yes. But who do I find more threatening, right? On one side, I can say that newcomers, are outsiders, and I'm always threatened by these outsiders pointing out problems. On the other hand, we sometimes say these people don't know any better, and therefore, we just are not as threatened because they're newcomers, while if an old-timer does it, they're saying it after knowing the norms of the place, and that's more threatening. I wondered how threat plays a role in how we respond to newcomers, right? Is it playing a role here because you've not, again, measured the mediators here of sense-making, but is threat at all there, or do you see a different pattern if threat is factored in?
Well, my first reasoning was along the lines that you just iterated, which is I thought threat is something that is perhaps less likely to be experienced in response to newcomer voice. So I thought, okay, there can be individual characteristics. Different newcomers might come across as more threatening than others, but I thought that a particular reason for adopting sense-making as a perspective rather than threat perspective, which has been done, was precisely this idea that, okay, threat doesn't seem to really explain why you would not endorse or not react positively to newcomer voice. And so that's when I started searching for alternative perspectives and settled on sense-making.
So you feel that you feel more threatened with an old-timer rather than a newcomer, right? If you're a supervisor,
Yeah.
if I have to compare the two, your speculation would be that it's more threatening when someone who's been in the organization for a long time is speaking up rather than a newcomer.
Again, I think there we know also from prior literature that there are attributes that reduce this perception of threat. We could think about LMX, for instance, so having a high quality leader-member relationship would certainly also reduce threat experienced. But again, that's something that newcomers need to build. And I'm now thinking about voice cultivation, which is an idea that has really fascinated me recently, because I think the assumption we've had for a very long time in the voice literature, also based on the Dieter paper, is that sharing voice laterally inside an organization can actually lead to more negative outcomes rather than positive outcomes. And for me, that cultivation perspective really also fit with what I was trying to say with sense-making, is that sometimes it's not just enough to share an idea once, but rather it needs to be shared multiple times. We need to build coalitions for the idea, and newcomers need to, let's say, have old-timers support them in their desire to I lost my train of thought, sorry.
Old-timers can help newcomers develop their ideas. It's a co-generation process, which is very valid. So thank you. Those were my two initial questions.
Okay. Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Wiese. Professor Wiese is Professor of Personal and Organizational Psychology at the RWTH Aachen University, and Professor Wiese was also a member of the assessment committee, and she is online.
Yes. Firstly, Tim, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of your assessment committee. It was a pleasure to read your thesis. Secondly, if there's one word I cannot pronounce properly in English, is socialization. I apologize for that. It's so difficult. And thirdly, thank you for giving me this really wonderful bound version of your dissertation. And this brings me to my first question, because I will cite a sentence from your dissertation now, starting on page 75. We argue that changes in newcomer voice and newcomer silence are reflective of changes in newcomers' goals and priorities, given that newcomers pursue multiple potentially conflicting goals during the onboarding period. They need to prioritize. As goal priorities change, newcomer voice and silence might change as well. Taking this as one of the starting points for one of your studies, I wondered whether you know anything about participants' goals and change of goals and change of goal priorities. So three parameters, so to say. So if you know something from your own participants or from the broader literature on organizational newcomers.
Well, actually, that is one of the things that that really frustrated me with this study, is that I was able to determine whether these newcomers understand the organization, whether they understand what their job implies, whether they understand what the goals and values are, etc., etc., etc. However, what this really does not tell us is what is it actually that the organization wants from the newcomer. So is it that the newcomer has realized that his performance, that his sole or core responsibility is to perform his job according to the is to preserve the status quo, or is it really to challenge the status quo? In other words, I understand based on my socialization measure that whether the newcomer has arrived at an understanding of the organization or not, but I do not understand yet, okay, what are the sort of inferences that he draws for his behaviors, and how does that change? And that's something that I struggled with, and now I struggle with remembering whether I answered your question at all. Sorry.
Yes, well, I allow myself to ask another question on this topic, because when I read your dissertation thesis, I thought that you were talking about self-set goals of the organizational newcomers, and that these organizational newcomers set themselves multiple goals and change their goal priority. So these goals sort of could be anything, like impress my supervisor or whatever. But this is not what you meant when you talk about multiple goals.
It's not what I mentioned on measure. Sorry.
Meant when you talk about that newcomers have.
No, that is certainly what I meant. I meant that newcomers learn about whether different behaviors, and I try to also illustrate it in my presentation, help newcomers to determine or to meet these different goals. Obviously, it would be really nice to supplement the quantitative data that I've collected with more qualitative insights, maybe gained from interviews, for instance, to really understand, okay, what are the lessons that newcomers have now learned in terms of okay, now does this meet, does engaging in promotive voice, for instance, help me to meet several of my goals? But based on my data, I cannot draw that inference very strongly. I agree.
Okay. Your study on the trajectories is really very interesting, and with respect to this study, but also to the other studies, it seems that you see a limitation in small sample sizes. You mentioned it today in your short presentation too. And now one could argue that in study planning, it is not about small or large sample sizes. It is all about sufficiently large sample sizes. And so the question is, have you made any attempts a priori, or at least a posteriori, to determine the sufficiently high sample sizes for your studies?
Correctly, whether it's to put it simply, whether I conducted power analyses to assess whether I have enough data to test my hypotheses. I did not do that a priori, and I did not do that post hoc. I understand that that's a limitation. Let me maybe talk a little bit more explicitly about kind of the background of study 3, where I think, or study 3, which is chapter 4, where I think sample size might be most prevalent as an issue. We conducted that study I had collected organizations and participants for this study prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the pandemic hit. There was a hiring freeze in organizations, contacts evaporated into thin air, and I had to look for alternatives. I partnered up with a very established sampling company, Respondi, to help me collect data. And they ended up collecting a great amount of data, 1,700 individuals, supervisors, newcomers. Unfortunately, they did not meet my sampling requirements that I set out a priori, which was I need newcomer supervisor dyads that have worked with one another for less than 12 months. And at that point, I really started to worry, okay, how can I test my ideas? And that is when we started with the LinkedIn sample, and we started to try to supplement this data with additional data. And we ended up at a sample size that I thought was adequate enough to test these ideas. I understand now that even post hoc there are tests to ascertain and increase your, as a committee member's, confidence in that sample size being adequate to test my results. And I think I will strongly take that into consideration for future research, for conducting such power analyses, not just post hoc but a priori. But I hope that sharing a little bit of a glimpse into the difficulties that I did encounter during the process of collecting that data understands perhaps or helps to explain why I could not or why I did not just outright say, okay, power analysis, boom, done, and now and here I go, so to speak. I hope that I've answered your question.
Yes, and I must say that perhaps power analysis with respect to complex data analytical methods is not such a simple thing to do. And so there's one question following up on that. I mean, we know that one of the parameters that you need for power analysis is assumed effect sizes. So what about within person effect sizes? Can we here use the same kind of benchmarks that we conventionally use with respect to other statistical methods?
Well, I guess I expected a small to medium effect size, and I don't know exactly the thresholds. I think there's a paper by Cohen that specifies exactly these values. Yes. Don't know them by heart, but certainly
That's sure. But Cohen was looking at between person effects and between person methods. So that's another topic to take into consideration for future, whether the same benchmarks can be taken for analysis based on in-person effects. It's not that trivial, I think, but thank you.
And I'm sure that I and my co-authors will look into it.
Maybe something to discuss later on. The opposition will be continued by Professor Reissner, Professor of Education, Research and Development, and Professor Reissner was also a member of the Assessment Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear candidate, first of all, I want to congratulate you with this beautiful PhD thesis. I've read it as if it was a thriller. And I especially appreciated your love for stories and details. So the introduction chapter clarifies your point of view with the story of Alexander the Great. And when I was reading it, you know, your mind starts floating around. What kind of research is he going to do? And then it struck me that my favorite Alexander the Great is the modern one, and his name was Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs once said, "We hire smart people not to tell them what to do, but to tell us what to do." So I thought, this might have been a perfect subject for your study. Because Steve Jobs seems to confirm whatever your view is on the importance of voicing. And especially he was working in the technology sector, so he would have rated high on your innovation climate very well in chapter 4. Mm-hmm. So that brings me to a question, because when reading your chapter 4, I was a bit puzzled. So my colleague Fred Seltzer said he was missing the psychological factors. I was missing the organizational factors. Mm-hmm. And I was missing it because you were constantly stressing the importance of context, whatever that might be. And context for me might either imply the way an organization incentivizes certain behaviors, whether that's safety or whether it's speaking up. And that brought me to the kind of research we are doing within accounting firms, where we see that junior members within the organizations don't sufficiently speak up, mm-hmm. and which in the end leads to making mistakes within the industry. So in analyzing your hypothesis, and that's my first question, your first hypothesis in chapter 4 says, perceived innovation climate moderates the relationship between institutionalized socialization and promotive voice, that's hypothesis 1A, as well as prohibitive voice 1B, in such ways that these relationships are positive if perceived innovation climate is high and non-significant if innovation climate is low. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, you are struggling in answering the questions. I am struggling in formulating the hypothesis, because I'm trying to figure out what is he actually saying, and then why doesn't his research support this famous hypothesis 1B? So I came up with 2 explanations, and I challenge you to give me a different interpretation than the interpretation I'm going to share with you. My interpretation is your study may lack granularity or sensitivity. So sensitivity, that's what we discussed in the previous question. But granularity is whether your pixel density is sufficiently to understand the real social processes which are going on in the organization. And I had 2 explanations why it might miss this sufficient level of granularity. The first is your sample. You mentioned that. But what I noticed in your mention about, in your sample of 83 newcomer supervisor diets, was you are sampling them across different industries, mm-hmm. across different countries, in different positions. So we have technology, health, and consumer goods. And I was kind of flabbergasted, I was nearly say, that you didn't check out or control for differences for whatever kind of position they're having, mm-hmm. whether different within different countries, they incentivize, they value different kinds of behaviors, and so forth and so forth. So I felt like, well, the way you are treating your data is, simply said, a newcomer is a newcomer. Mm-hmm. It's irrespective of where they're originating from. And so I want to have your view on this, whether my interpretation is a correct one, whether you are indeed treating newcomers as newcomers, independent of the position they're in, yes or no. And depending then on your answer on my question, I will raise a second question. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely. It's been quite a long question, so let me quickly try to drill down to what you were trying to say, which is that you question my choice of sampling across different contexts, and you wonder whether that might have had an effect on the lack of support I find for hypothesis 1B.
Yes, you're doing as if a newcomer of 23 in a position in healthcare mm-hmm. is the same kind of person of 32 years working in the aviation industry.
Yeah. Well, I would like to point out there that there are several controls in our data set, and I think I'm not sure whether I report all of these in the paper. One of them is the number of prior jobs. I think that is in the controls, so that is a variable that we do try to incorporate, where I assume, okay, newcomers who have held multiple jobs within one particular industry will have greater socialization experience, and thus that will change the relationship. We'll also have, let's say, perhaps a smaller time frame to be socialized, or shorter time frame. Another thing that we control for, obviously, is age. So that is also something that is incorporated in the... Is it not?
Yeah, you do. But I'm doing this. This is the old teacher in me, so I apologize.
No, I'm sorry.
But for me, it's still like a newcomer is a newcomer because you are controlling on the input side. So what you do is you're controlling whether the sample in its terms of composition differs. And then your chapter says there are no differences, basically. My point is it may depend on their position they are having within the company or in the organization. That already by itself may explain certain variability. So am I appointed as a manager or just a junior?
Well, on the one hand, I would agree with you that it certainly could matter to what position you're appointed to. On the other hand, the thing that fascinated me particularly about voice is that voice can stem from anywhere in an organization. It can stem from the lowest level of employees, and that is one of the defining characteristics. So my assumption would be that irrespective of where a newcomer might start inside an organization, voice would and should be a desirable behavior from the organization's perspective.
Okay, having said this brings me to my second question, if the chair allows me. Okay. So this is the real stuff coming now. In that chapter, I haven't counted it, but you're stressing over and over the importance of the relevant characteristics of the context people are working in. And I'm quoting you, that you're saying that understanding how context provides situational opportunities and constraints can shape organizational behavior in powerful ways. And I thought, okay, I agree. Who am I to disagree? However, you're not defining context. So is for you a context in terms of task? Is it a learning culture? Is it the leadership? Is it organizational structure? Is it corporate governance? Or could it be that the difference lies in the nature of the job? Aviation is not the same as banking. And hierarchy in aviation is a different kind of hierarchy than in healthcare. So could it be that voicing up could be caused by differences in the professions people are in?
I would agree with you most certainly, and I think that incorporating such job characteristics or also relational characteristics in different industries into the research could lead to further insights along this.
Then a very simple question, just say yes or no.
Yes.
Why didn't you control for it then?
I did in some of the supplementary analyses that I conducted that did not make it into this paper. If I recall correctly, and this has been a while, so forgive me, I did indeed find that there was, I think it was healthcare, which makes sense, obviously, right? As one of the industries where just as a industry in itself predicted higher levels of prohibitive voice. So yes, I saw that my overall results remained unaffected by this, and given the fact that I did not have enough observations for different industries, I decided not to test any further moderation or etc. But certainly it's something that is very interesting, and where more fine-grained or granular, I think as you called it, look at different industries or different subsectors, would be of added value. I aimed for trying to provide holistic, parsimonious insights, and that is a trade-off that I made, I think.
Okay, thank you for helping me out on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Dos Santos, Assistant Professor, University of Maastricht, Specialization in Organizational Behaviour.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear team, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today in the Oral Defense Committee and be part of such an important accomplishment to you. It was also a pleasure to read your very well written, interesting and relevant dissertation on such a pertinent topic that it's newcomer voice behavior. My question relates to the first study in chapter 2. In this study, you draw on sense-making theory to argue that supervisors tend to endorse newcomer promotive voice and to ignore or dismiss newcomer prohibitive voice. And you theorize that, and I'm quoting, newcomer promotive voice provides important cues that help to generate meaning, which motivates supervisors to give up their existing understanding and endorse newcomers' comments. And in contrast, you theorize that when confronted with prohibitive voice, supervisors might need to question their own interpretation, reflect on the given situation, and develop a novel understanding of the status quo. And that managers do not naturally engage in this reflection process. So you are suggesting that sense-making and reflection process are the reason why supervisors endorse or do not endorse newcomer voice behavior. However, your methodological approach doesn't seem to follow this rationale, as you didn't capture and measure whether supervisors engage in these sense-making and reflection behaviors when interpreting the ideas or concerns raised by the newcomers. So it seems that you are assuming that supervisors are able to make sense of the ideas raised by newcomers, and that they are not able to make sense of the problems or concerns. So this is one of the, this is part of, or the first part of the question, and I want to reflect on these and on the implications of not measuring the sense-making and reflection for your findings and for the theoretical implications. And the same goes for the role of organizational socialization in your study. You theorize and argue that supervisors are more likely to endorse promotive voice and less likely to ignore prohibitive voice when voice is raised by well-socialized newcomers as they speak in a well-socialized way that facilitates managerial sense-making. However, again, you didn't measure how the newcomers raise their voice, whether, for instance, they use organizational language when they speak up. So it seems that you are assuming that a newcomer with high levels of organizational socialization speaks up in a well-socialized way, whatever that might be. So I would like to reflect on these aspects and hear your thoughts.
I'm not sure I completely understood your question, but I'll do my best to answer it anyways. Dear esteemed opponent, I also completely realized that I forgot about addressing you all according to your station.
No worries.
For which I would like to sincerely
we understand.
apologize. Back to your knowledge. Back to your question. I think that when I talk about well-socialized voice, what I had in mind is that socialization provides newcomers with contextualized knowledge that can help them to enhance their voice quality. I think that is an implicit argument that is somewhat hidden or concealed in my data, in my analysis, in my argument. Unfortunately, as you pointed out correctly, the sense-making process is something, because I think it is stems from a constructivist perspective, that is notoriously difficult to quantify and translate into a quantitative setting, and hence I really struggled also in my search for measures that would help me to be able to incorporate this into the design, maybe with a follow-up study for this paper. I thought also that here having additional qualitative data, that really interviewing newcomers to get a sense of how does their voice develop over time, and how does maybe how do these dimensions or these attributes that I point to in my literature, to what extent is that also reflected in the nature of their voice? And at the same time, obviously asking managers for their reasons or rationale for supporting or not supporting.
You may finish your sentence if you want. If you can't remember, it's okay.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that and discuss with you after.
Tim Reissner. The time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and the quality of your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Get the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Tim Reissner, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Günther is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Tim Alexander Reissner, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
You can take
It's good, Emil.
you can take pictures if you like. You may continue with the laudatio, Dr. Günther.
Dear Tim, dear Dr. Reissner, this is the first time that I address you with doctor, but strangely enough, it feels entirely natural, as if this is what you were always meant to be. And it's probably to do with you being such an intellectually gifted, broad-minded thinker. Tim, your PhD began in September 2017, and you were off to a flying start. Your first 2 years, never-ending series of accomplishments. So by September 2019, you had already collected 2 empirical data sets, the ADDIC data set and an ambitious longitudinal data set. Your ever first submission to the Academy of Management was granted a place in the Aeon proceedings, which is reserved for the top 10% of all publications submitted. And you were nominated for the Outstanding Tutor Award at SBE, testimony to your teaching talent. And in 2020, you were in the middle of organizing a research stay with Supra to University of Maryland. And then in March 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and from that moment onwards, your journey took an unexpected turn, akin to the plot twists often found in dramatic narratives, and it turned out that the data collection for Chapter 3 was much more difficult than anticipated, and in addition, the analysis of Paper 2 also turned out to be much more complicated than anticipated, and you needed to become a master in all things related to centering decisions and random coefficient growth modeling. But to keep the story somewhat short, sometimes things need to get worse before they can get better, and better they did get, and you came out of this challenging time stronger than before. So, Tim, today we got another taste of your academic talent. Overall, the results of your work, they're impressive. You produced this interesting set of rigorous empirical studies on newcomer voice behavior. And I'm sure these studies, they will leave a mark on the field of voice behavior. The Journal of Occupational Organizational Psychology is the first that has secured one of these publications from your dissertation, and I'm sure others will follow. By the way, I believe that also your introduction deserves to be published. That would be quite uncommon. But just one of these parts in the introduction, Employee Voice Behavior, a Concept 2,000 Years in the Making. I mean, the title alone can drive a publication. I mean, scholars in voice behavior area, they routinely would reach back to Albert Hirschman, to the 70s. And I might have seen one or two reach back as far as Adam Smith, but no one ever reached back more than 2,000 years to Alexander the Great and Koinos' chief commander, who spoke up to Alexander urging him not to continue his military campaign. So very impressive. There's also this acknowledgement section in your thesis with these dozens of individualized thank you notes to supporters, including myself and your promoter, Simon de Jong. He would have loved to be here in person, but is cheering you from a distance. But given the extensive acknowledgement section, I felt it would be appropriate to go back to some of the supporters and see what they have to say about you. So I have a selection here of shortened statements from colleagues at the Department of Organization, Strategy and Entrepreneurship. So Nina had to say this about him. I remember this one evening where after a few too many beers, sorry, that's the wrong list, that's for later today, sorry. So, here we go. Yandre had to say this. Tim is a thoughtful, caring, and supportive person with a sharp wit and the ability to break tension with humor. Tim stands as example to us all in how we can strive for excellence in our work and our approach to the people around us. Roman said, Tim is a genuinely good and friendly person, always helpful, supportive, and crazy smart. Simon de Jong said, it was an honor and good fun to be his promoter. Tim is social, hardworking, reliable, proactive, independent, curious, constructively critical, and open to new ideas and approaches. Juliette said, Tim took care in making sure the PhD students would feel part of the OSE department, in particular after the COVID times and in the process of reconnecting. His collegiality speaks for him. And Anita Weisen said, I remember Tim as a very friendly colleague, almost always with a big smile. Katharina had to say this, Tim is a great person, colleague, and academic. It was a tremendous pleasure working with him in the crisis management course, for which he was an amazing tutor and course coordinator. And several students considered him one of the best, or maybe the best tutor they've ever had. Jermaine said he was always positive, interested, and provided constructive comments. I wish him truly all the best and that his Eintracht will continue to play on top level. Eline said, what I admire most about Tim is that you can talk about anything with him. He has had such helpful advice on doing research, teaching, and life. But we've also spent many evenings talking about the Eurovision Song Contest. And Nina finally had to say this. Tim is one of the most reliable, thoughtful, and supportive people I've ever met. I can only wish for everyone to have a Tim in their life. Well, although everyone should have a Tim in their life, only a few are lucky enough to have the real Tim in their life. And with that, I congratulate your entire family, in particular your parents, Frau Reissner, Dr. Reissner, herzlichen Glückwunsch. I tried to lock Tim up in the academic ivory tower, and I failed. And it has partially to do with Tim being on a mission to bring joy to children's hearts and to revolutionize the field of Lego toys, the field of Klemmbausteine. and that is, of course, something as me, father of two young children, can only most wholeheartedly support. Of course, I congratulate you, Katharina, and I wish you all the best with your soon-to-grow family. Tim, Dr. Reissner, it has been an absolute honor serving as your co-supervisor, so again, congratulations with this outstanding achievement. I'm convinced you will continue doing great things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Reissner, also on behalf of Maastricht University and of the School of Business and Economics, I congratulate you with the degree that you have acquired. And herewith, I close the session. Okay, if you want to make photos, we will stand here and you can make pictures. We have the drinks and whatever we have there.
Recording stopped.
Okay. Thank you.
Dann können wir das schön auf Fotos machen. Pass auf, das ist ein Grundlage. Ja, ich hab's. Dann können wir in front.
Yeah. With your paralymph.
Yes.